Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner U podcast, recorded live from my bed. It never gets old saying that at the beginning.
How many times have you said that
This is
already?
like the third or fourth one that I've done from the hospital bed. Hopefully I will have my desk back soon, but a couple more weeks. I am joined today by my dear friend, new friend,
Yeah.
Ryan Kassim. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, this is an honor to be watching you in your bed, not
That's
fully
creepy.
showered yet. I don't care. Let me talk. I thought I was the guest.
Hey,
You just
carry
interrupt
on.
me.
Carry on.
I will say we've been friends for now 4 months now.
Yeah.
Yep,
It's almost our 6-month anniversary.
it's coming up. It's coming up.
One of the people who, you meet someone and you just kind of hit it off right away and it's easy. And I think it speaks to the values that we carry. I mean, we met at an educational conference, at a business conference, and kind of hit it off. I did Ryan's podcast. So if you're interested in hearing me talk about my feels, you can go hop on Ryan's podcast.
It's one of my mom's and aunt's favorite podcasts.
Perfect.
I think I told you they listen to it and they go, that gives me hope for the future generation. After they listen to like the two of us open our feelings, I was like, okay. She's like, I love that, Paul. He's great.
I'll take it. It is funny though. Like, I mean, it's a great place to start our conversation because we gelled on the topic of, emotions, mindset around fitness.
Mm.
But I think in a lot of cases, our fitness or our nutrition is a direct manifestation of the mindset we carry about our entire lives, right? It's almost like the lowest, I want to say lowest hanging fruit, but that's not the right term. Like, it's almost just the easiest for us to manifest those things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you work actively with your clients on. So maybe speak a little bit to kind of maybe your philosophy or the way that you kind of approach coaching in that regard.
Yeah, what's funny is like whenever I get asked that question, it kind of like my first thought is I see almost like a highlight reel of my my fitness, health, and then mental health journey, because my mental health journey really didn't start until after I hit rock bottom, right? But before that, my fitness and nutrition journey was very your prototypical, like I got into it for one, probably girls when I was 13, going to the gym with my dad, and then sports, right? Playing football and all that stuff. And then nutrition kind of came along with more like wanting to have better aesthetics and better performance and all these other things. And mental health was just not really a thing for me, right? I think my philosophy around mental health only came true because I hit rock bottom, right? Like I essentially was starting to get panic attacks, which I had never really had in my life. And I started getting like actual panic attacks, like just waking up in the middle of my sleep. I would get panic attacks in the gym. So it was interesting because my philosophy was like, oh, like fitness, nutrition is your life, right? Like that was my philosophy until I realized it is until it's not, right? And I think that was the biggest thing for me was I needed those physical reminders that you can't keep suppressing or not having some sort of mental health hygiene if you want to continue being physically active and healthy, right? So that was my introduction to mental health. Was I had these rock bottom moments where I suffered with anxiety, depression, which got me into therapy, which helped me realize that one, I wasn't just having panic attacks in that moment. I was having them throughout my childhood. I was just diagnosed with asthma, right? Like people thought, the doctors thought I had asthma, which was wild because I was, first time I noted it was during football. Like I was having like shortness of breath and they're like, oh, it's the fall season. Sometimes athletes get like, sports induced asthma, stuff like that. It was anxiety. It was panic attacks because my lungs were fine when they did all the testing, all that stuff. They gave me an inhaler, and looking back on it, it was something that I struggled with majority of my life. It was just never like mental health just wasn't really talked about like that in that way, right? Like sports psychology wasn't really a thing until like nowadays. I feel like when athletes are coming out more talking about their anxieties. So all to say, like my philosophy is now focused on not just your metabolic health, but your mindset and how that impacts your manner of living. And that's really my focus when it comes to how I coach my clients now is, hey, let's not just focus on your nutrition and your fitness, but let's talk about sort of, the root reasons to, why you may be stressy or, feeling anxious when going to the gym or, any sort of shame or guilt cycle that you feel, right? We have to sort of iron those things out to facilitate our fitness and our nutrition.
Yeah, I whenever I think about the link, we have to look at fitness as like essentially stringing together behaviors. And those behaviors are either going to be in line with or in opposition to your goals.
Mm,
And whenever I conceptualize this, it's thoughts and feelings lead to actions. So
mm-hmm,
you have these thoughts that give you these feelings, or these feelings that give you these thoughts, and that leads into the impact on your actions.
mm,
So if we're trying to string together actions that lead us towards a desired outcome,
mm-hmm,
we have to address the thoughts and feelings that lead to those actions. And I used to believe like I'm a very disciplined person. If I want to put my thoughts and feelings off to the side,
mm-hmm.
no issue. I did it for 30 years.
Right.
But at 30, your cup overfloweth, my friend.
Mm,
And
mm,
so I found myself in a similar situation. I had a panic attack for the first time, felt
mm-hmm,
anxiety for the first time, and
mm-hmm,
it was kind of faced with a lot of questions around what I had centered my identity on.
mm,
I had centered my identity on, certain pillars in my life that just came down.
mm-hmm,
And finally, I was faced with, oh, there's a lot of shit underneath the hood here that I haven't been addressing. And I went to therapy as well. I just actually just wrote out a script for my next YouTube vlog. Well, I guess if it's a vlog, it can't be scripted. So I wrote down some notes for my next YouTube vlog
it's all
about my
fake.
injury. Yeah. And I wrote, I was like, I've been in therapy since 2019. So I've been in therapy now for 5 years, which I thought was pretty cool
Mm-hmm,
because I see the personal growth that went along with those 5 years spent in therapy.
mm,
Um, I'm sure for you, a lot of the aspects of therapy have kind of bled into your coaching practice.
mm-hmm.
Do you structure that in any certain way, or is it just kind of built into the framework of how you coach?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I want to comment first when you said your cup overfloweth. For me, it felt like my cup was underfloweth. Right, like I kept trying to draw from the same actions that I thought would have made me feel good in the past. Like I overutilized the tools of exercise to cope with stress. And then it was kind of like that first, like apparently people who drink coffee, I've never had it, but like that first cup of coffee hits, right?
Wait, you've never drank coffee?
Let's not get too off subject here. We'll go back. We'll circle back.
Okay, we'll circle back. Sorry.
So it almost feels like that first like hit, right? Where it's just like, oh, this is great. Like I'm good now, right? So for me, that was exercise for a long time. And then when I kept trying to pull from that cup, it hit less and hit less until like that's why I started to get like panic attacks at the gym, which used to be like my safe space to sort of deal and cope with emotions, right? So like you say overflow for me was like underflow because I was just like it was empty. I had nothing left to pull from, and that's when I
I'm
had to
gonna
face my
pull
shit.
this
Yeah.
as the
How
thumbnail for the
would you pull
podcast.
this, man? Pull it all. And then to answer your question about clients, like I think for me, it did help me tremendously because one, it made me a better listener and also empathetic as fuck. Like I cry at everything now. Like I can tune into people's emotions and what things mean to them a lot better. But in terms of like how I'll structure my systems, like I always tell my clients, like the first like couple months is really about creating self-awareness, right? Like same thing that we do in therapy is we need to like you can't fix any problems until you recognize what those problems are or like reflect on yourself and know like it's you, right? And create less of that victim mindset. So any type of sort of coaching and systems always starts with that self-awareness stage, right? So self-awareness stage just really comes from asking reflective questions as a coach, right? I think too many coaches get into this business because they want to fix somebody, right? Or they know like, oh, like fitness and nutrition completely changed my life and I just want to give that to you and get you to that stage quicker. But it's like people are where they are and you need to meet them where they are And I think it's our duties as coaches to really, like, in those, especially those first couple months, like, you have to be very, very reflective and throw your own expectations out the window too. Because I think as coaches, we're like, this is how the program works. And like this, by this stage, we should get to here. This stage, we should get to here. But it's like, we're all on our own timelines. Right. And my job as the coach is to meet you constantly where you're at to get you just to the next step. And I can only do that by asking more reflective questions, by saying, like, hey, what specifically made you feel anxious about going to the gym? Right. So we can ask a more reflective question that's not a yes or no question that allows them to reflect, and sort of we could start pulling these little pieces of evidence and data to help get them to realize on their own, because that's the whole thing, is they need that self actualization to get them to realize, like, oh, this actually stems from this, or it's the voice of this person who told me I was a piece of shit and I'd never do this, right? Like, and start labeling and creating all these identities and shifts to help create that self-awareness. I think, like, if there's any system at all, it's the first one is self-awareness and helping the client become more aware and in tune with themselves.
Something that I've noticed, especially when working with clients on the process of self awareness, is unless someone has been through therapy,
Mm-hmm.
they attach these good, bad, happy, sad, negative, positive to the emotions that they're feeling, almost as though they're judging themselves at every step. I think that for me has been one of the most challenging things to work on with
Mm,
clients because it's something that I personally still struggle with.
yeah.
But that's also a double edged sword in that because I'm still struggling with it, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for it. Do you have any sort of strategies or tools that you use to kind of tease out or break the chain of that judgment that people will impose on themselves?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I can also empathize with you too, because I have noted in these this probably this year how incredibly self-critical I can be of myself. Right? I think especially with ambitious people or people who seek growth, it's like you said, it is a double-edged sword, because it's like you want this growth, this growth is good for you in the long run. However, we can be our own bullies at the same time when we don't meet a certain threshold or a standard, or maybe it's our expectations, right? I think expectations is a big thing, right? We we as people, and or as clients as well, is that we can, as coaches, we can always lay out expectations all along, but for whatever reason a client can still think in their head that, like, oh, I should be good by now, or I should have gotten this habit nailed down, right? And
I'm
then
not at this place I should be. Yeah, for sure.
and I think it's important to catch those moments as a coach, because you can bring, like, think about it in therapy too. Like, when you're talking to your therapist and they catch you in that cycle of starting to go down, like, oh, well, like, I should have, like, done this better. Or like, you start going down a rabbit hole. It's the same thing for your clients, is you have to catch those moments where maybe they're using specific terminology to label their behaviors, right? You mentioned like good or bad, right? So hearing those sort of trigger words as a coach should ring off some alarms for you. Be like, okay, we need to rein this in. We need to talk about how we're labeling this behavior as good or bad when it just is, right? And it's not that you're doing anything inherently good or inherently bad. It's just an activity or a habit or an action that you performed. And your levity and your expectations are causing you to repeat this negative pattern that is causing you to bully yourself, right? And again, and that can go back into another self-awareness conversation as well, where it's like, well, where does that stem from, right? Were you that overweight kid growing up who was bullied for their weight, or was bullied at all, or like you just had low self-esteem your whole life, so you never really grew the habit of optimism, or uh, being pragmatic. And I think it's in those moments as a coach where you can catch trigger words, or you can just, through conversation, start to sort of get a feel for that client's pattern of their self-talk, of their narratives. Narratives are really important, right? We know this with our own lives, and we know this with clients, is like, if we are like same thing, it's your neural pathways in your brain. If your brain will play the same story over and over and over, same thoughts over and over and over again, right? Until we start to interject, right? Until we start to, again, awareness, we catch that, we know to be like, oh, nope, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. I'm going to interject and say like, hey, I might have went off track this day, but that doesn't define me as a person. And I'm going to replace this thought with an action that's going to support what I want. That's going to support maybe a healthier mindset or more positive mindset. And I'm saying this a way that sounds very simple. It's really fucking hard, right? Obviously, if you and I have been in therapy for years, we're still working through that. So I think that's the expectation as for a coach and a client as well. Is like, this shit takes a long time, right? For most coaches working with clients, it's like a 12-month period. Like, it's going to take longer than that too, right? It's like, so it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot to tease out there. I think from a business perspective, when you look at
Mm-hmm.
that, you're like, how do I sell someone on the fact that I cannot make quick changes when everyone around me is promising quick changes?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to, okay, how do you present your information? What types of clients are you actively looking for? How do you present yourself publicly? That's all going to manifest itself in the type of person that does reach out and raise their hand and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I need some help.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of things, this conversation always begs the question of extreme ownership. So this is a concept that has become obviously more popular with, guys like Jocko Willink speaking about ownership. And the expression or the term that I love to use with my clients, and you get two responses. I say, this is your fault, right? And there's two responses from that. They either go, you know what, you're right. And if it's my fault, I can fix it because I'm responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Or they respond back as, no, it's this circumstance and it's this person from my childhood and it's this, that, and that other thing. I'm like, cool. So it's still your fault. One of those answers leads to action. One of those answers leads to blame, stagnation, and judgment. Which path do you want to choose?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's our job as coaches. You mentioned earlier on, you have to meet your client where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So if your client is in that stage of blame and abdicating responsibility, how do you bring them to the point where it's like where they admit that they're the only one who has control over their lives?
Mm-hmm.
They're the only one who has control over their actions. And the only way to move forward is to take actions that more closely align with your goals.
Mm-hmm.
That is a monumental shift for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a quote that comes to mind when you said that is, and something I've been saying to my clients a lot more too, is you can either hurt to hurt or you can hurt to heal.
Ooh. Did
So
you say that or did you steal that?
I stole it. I think it was JB Copeland. I don't know if you follow him on Instagram. He's a
Never
great
heard of him. It's yours.
great follow. Mental health Instagram page. But you can hurt to hurt or you can hurt to heal, right? So basically, you can continue down the same path where you don't take ownership, but you continue to linger in all your pain and all your victim mindset, or you can hurt, which is an inevitable outcome, whether you're in a growth mindset or a victim mindset. But in the end, you're going to lead to a much better place because you're doing the actions and you're having these conversations and reflections that's allowing you to slowly evolve and heal.
Dude, change hurts so fucking bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're talking we're having this conversation and like obviously I'm going through something that's incredibly painful with my injury. And I'm just thinking about like I have to go through pain in order to heal my tissues.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to go through pain to heal your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I am in an incredible amount of discomfort. Being in a place of healing is uncomfortable. I also have we talk about the blame game. I could blame the fact that the equipment on the platform was different than the warm up room. I could blame the fact that the timing of my knee wraps was too fast. I could blame the spotters. I could blame the this. I could blame the that. Or I could just accept the fact that I had a freak accident
Mm-hmm.
and move on with my life,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I practice acceptance. It's one of the things that I actively cultivate in my life is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
But that acceptance is painful. because it places the responsibility on me.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I find incredibly interesting, and I haven't quite found the way to articulate it well, so bear with me. I'm someone who I love taking responsibility. I hate asking for help,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that I need it. And I also have a coach. And so I ask my coach for help. That vulnerability required to ask a coach to help is something that we as coaches in the position to help need to really, really, really value
Mm-hmm.
and hold in high regard.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, I think the first quote that comes in my mind is asking for help is the strongest thing anybody could ever do. Right? That's asking for help is like the most powerful thing you could ever do. Right? It's like like you mentioned, it's vulnerability. It's admitting that you can't do it alone. Right? Which is of made like not just for men, but like for any human. It's like admitting that you need help getting something off the top shelf is it makes you feel weak. It makes you like you go through all these insecurities very, very quickly, right? It's almost like
Oh, yeah.
ingrained in our DNA. So that's when it comes to facilitating that, because what you're really talking about is creating a safe space for your clients to be able to ask for help, right? Because that is up to the coach to set that environment, right? Because it is incredibly powerful. I mean, they're already asking for help when they sign up for coaching, right? But it is something where you have to constantly enforce that environment for a safe space for somebody to feel vulnerable to continue to ask for help, right? Because as coaches, when we lay out expectations, like I always say, like, hey, you're gonna have setbacks. You're gonna come to a point where you don't even want to fucking talk to me because you're gonna be feel shame or guilt when reaching out because you went off track, right? Like I go, you're gonna remember this conversation, right? And I'm laying out that expectation from the get go. But also, what we need to do as coaches and what we do in relationships too is like for example, like if your partner does an amazing job of comforting you when you go through something hard, or they cook and they make your favorite meal or something like that, like as a partner, when you tell them, hey, I really love when you do this action, right? It means this to me. What you're doing is you're further cementing them to wanting to do that action because they now know how it makes you feel. So when a client asks for help, as a coach, it is our responsibility to say, hey, just before I get into this conversation, I just want to let you know how much I respect and admire how much I appreciate you asking for this and asking for help. Because what that does, you're reinforcing, you're positively reinforcing that action for them asking for help, right? Which is creating that safe space to communicate, right? Because as our job, again, we talked about awareness, we talked about conversations, we talked about behavior change. Like that doesn't happen if that client doesn't feel safe enough to ask for help,
Yeah, you have to
right?
really foster that relationship. And I think one thing that I do like I make it a habit and I make it a point because in general, I know that my coaching style is highly critical and that I hold my clients to a very high standard.
Mm-hmm.
So when they do something that meets that standard, absolutely make it a point to let them know how proud of them I am for doing what they did.
Mm-hmm.
But especially when asking for help or whenever they are vulnerable, I let
Mm-hmm.
them know. I'm like, I am so grateful that you trust me to share this with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to help you work through it. And without fail, it's always met with, of course, you're the one I trust, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you form a relationship. And everything we've spoken about is that, oh man, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it because to me, the coach athlete relationship is the most important relationship that you will ever engage in outside of your romantic partner.
Mm-hmm.
That for, I hesitate to say it because it's a bit corny, but every hero needs a guide,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're the hero of your story, which you absolutely should be, the one in control of your life, you are the hero. Every hero has a guide.
Mm-hmm.
And we are that person for so many people that trust us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do our best in that. And we should never do anything that takes that relationship for granted.
Mm, absolutely. Well, and I think And I like that you get goosebumps, and I would even challenge you, like, it's not corny, because corny, I feel like, is when it doesn't feel as authentic. But when it's authentic, like the fact that you get goosebumps means
Oh,
that's
it's
connected
true. I
deep to
love my
you.
job. Yeah.
Right. Same. And again, like that's why I'll tear up when a client will be like, I'm so thankful for this, or I'm grateful for you, or like, this is everything I needed. Right. Like those are things where I'm just like, oh, here's the tears. I'm like, thank you. Thanks for making me cry. Right. And some things you touched on, like I actually started taking vocal lessons yesterday. My first vocal lessons I've taken in like 10 years. And my teacher, right, her name's Emily. Shout out Emily. But for me, my history was like, I made an album 10 years ago, and I got a lot of backlash from family and close friends, specifically saying like, oh, like, hey, like, voice isn't that great, blah blah blah. And like that did a lot to my confidence with singing, right? So when I had my lesson yesterday, I was shaky, dude. I was sweating, like I was like laughing, like nervously laughing. And she's like, hey, it's okay. And then when I would do something, she's like, hey, I just want you to know I'm so proud of you. That was so good. And dude, I had like my eyes were like welling up with tears when she said that. Because again, we talk about like safe space for clients, and like at creating a good positive environment. Like for her to say I'm so proud of you in that moment, like even if it wasn't something great, but like just the action of doing, right? Even if it wasn't like a superstar standard, it made me feel good, and it validated like years and years of myself telling I wasn't good enough, right? So the responsibility of a coach is incredibly important, and just saying like how proud you are of a client when they perform certain actions where like to them might have seemed impossible. Maybe it's gym anxiety, whatever it might be, right? Like we need to recognize those wins, right? And I like in the, like you mentioned, like the hero always has like a guide, like in life too, like a monk has a guru, right? And the guru's job isn't to say what's right or wrong. It's just to provide that space for that monk to flourish and grow and become the next teacher for the next monk coming up, right? So every person we look up to has had somebody in their life that has guided them, right? That has instilled some sort of good morals and guidance. For me, I think we talked about my on my podcast. For me, it was Carl Bodner. He was my mentor in high school. Who, again, nothing but positive reinforcement, nothing but lessons learned. A good listener, right? So we all need that guru in our life to guide us, to listen to us, and again, not tell us something's right or wrong, but just be like sort of these, like the when you go bowling, like the guardrails, so you don't go into the gutters, right? There are bumpers. Like gurus are just bumpers, right? They're not bowling for us. They're just, hey, let's keep you on track to what you want, but let you hit those bumpers so that you can make mistakes along the way, so you can get to your goal eventually still.
With I want to tease this out. So with vocal lessons,
Mm-hmm.
is that something that you like? You love singing, like you really enjoy it?
Yeah, I love singing. I love playing guitar. It's one of those things where, um, like I was always in and it's something I was bad at. Like I was always an athlete, always worked out, never a problem, confident as fuck when it comes to this stuff, right? That's why it was so funny to me yesterday when I felt like the most insecure person in the world when she's like, all right, we're going to go through our scales now. I'm just like, like I'm just like, oh, like that, that uncomfortability of putting yourself, that's vulnerability in itself, right? Singing and putting part of your soul out there. It's like, so for me, I've always enjoyed singing. I've always enjoyed music. And it took one summer for me where I was living with my dad and my stepmom, and I really wanted nothing to do with them at the time. So I was making good money in an internship, and I bought a guitar. And that whole summer, I just stayed in my room and played guitar and tried to learn to sing and all these other things till I did it. By the end of the summer, I could play and sing on guitar, right? And I've always battled this dichotomy of my passion for fitness and my passion for music. Because to me, it was always like, oh, you have to go all in on one thing, right? So, there was points where, like I said, I made an album, and it was like some of the best. times in my life, right? You're in that creative process, like you're pouring your heart into lyrics and music, and like my ability to like hear certain things I wanted to add to it. Like it was just a really cool thing to tap into and go into a flow state there, where I've always known I can get into a flow state when it comes to lifting, right? Like I know I can get in sort of a flow state there. Um, so for me, it was always a struggle of battling that dichotomy until one point I chose fitness and nutrition because one, I needed to make my business grow, right? But also because I got a lot of negative feedback when I did this thing,
Mhm.
right? Like I didn't get as much support as maybe I would give to someone else, right? So I went all in on this because people like just really gravitated to that. They're like, oh, you're so good at this, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, let me go all in on this. But it's always something where if you don't pursue something deep down in your heart you always want to do, that resentment builds and regrets start to form, right?
The reason I ask is I think the way you feel about music and vocals
Mm,
is the way some people feel about fitness. It was maybe they really enjoyed moving their body, but maybe because of their weight or maybe because of their social circle or maybe because
mm-hmm,
of their environment, it didn't foster any sort of further engagement in that and they
yeah,
gravitated away from it.
mm-hmm,
I also think that there's two types of people. There are people that run towards challenging opportunities, people who enjoy doing hard things. And then there are people who actively avoid that discomfort because maybe they fear being bad at it or they, for whatever reason, there is a multitude of reasons why you might run from discomfort. Fitness, if done properly, is not comfortable.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
you add in the fact that is a form of discomfort. It's a form of manufactured hardship.
mm-hmm,
Add to that on top the fact that maybe that person wasn't encouraged to continue to seek mastery in that. And maybe it's something that they didn't even enjoy.
mm-hmm,
Now you're asking them to dive into that.
mm-hmm,
That's going to be a really triggering experience for that person.
mm-hmm. And it's funny you said that, dude, because I literally said that during my vocal lesson yesterday. I go, this has given me a lot of empathy towards clients who express anxiety when going to a gym, right? Like anytime you start something new where the waters are brand new for you, it's so anxiety producing, and your insecurities get in the way a lot faster than your actions get ahead of you, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is that we always think, and I think this is a good reframe, and I'm saying this to myself too as I go about this vocal lesson journey, is we always think about the worst that can happen, right? That's our first thought. It's like, oh man, this, like, they're gonna make fun of me, or like people are gonna look at me in the gym and they're gonna judge me, or like I'm not, like I'm gonna go on a machine, I'm gonna make a fool of myself, or I'm gonna get hurt. Like your first thought is something negative, right? A good reframe is, well, what's the best thing that can happen to me, right? And that is how we start to prune those negative neural pathways in our brain and introduce a new optimistic neural pathway or thought process, where we're just like, well, what's the best thing that can happen, right? And you start going through those scenarios, right? Well, best thing that happens is my voice gets really fucking good and I'm singing right in front of Paul, and he's like, that made me cry because you were a fucking voice of Jesus, right? Like that's like
You're
best
being
case
next
scenario.
Michael Bublé.
That's right. And then same thing in the gym. It's like, well, best thing to happen is I go to the gym consistently. I get the body I want. My health improves. I can be more independent. My bone density increases. I don't have to worry about my balance anymore, right? Like you start going through those scenarios, right? I make friends at the gym, right? Then it becomes more of an optimistic journey rather than something that's very daunting. Because I just think it's, when you start something new, it's just kind of built in you to start thinking of the worst things that can happen rather than reframe and say, well, what's the best thing?
I love that. I love that. And I think it's the perfect remedy to the situation. But again, hard to get there.
Mm-hmm.
You need that person in your ear,
Yeah.
reframing, catching those changes in language, catching that. Maybe it's one of the things that I find really fun to do is I work with a lot of athletes. So a lot of what we do is based on stress management.
Mm.
So I'll be working with an athlete on recovery. We're trying to manage lifestyle stress, and they'll send me an email at 3:30 in the morning telling me they're not stressed. I'm like, "You're awake at 3:30 in the morning. Pretty sure you're stressed."
Right.
And that's one of the things that I find so interesting about coaching is we need to become master communicators, and that can
Hmm.
only happen if we're really good at communicating with ourselves
Hmm.
and we're really good at communicating within the relationships that we hold in our lives, because our mediums for communication remove body language for to a large degree. They remove intonation and tone because we're reading text, we're not listening to voice.
Hmm.
So being able to identify those things becomes even more challenging. Within your coaching practice, do you do a lot of video calls with your clients, or is it primarily email communication or some other means?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so here's how I've navigated because I feel like I've been through the gambit, like from the start of my coaching business to where we're at now. So when I first started, I did like I guess over give, we'll say, where it's just like I did phone calls with everybody like once a week for as long as they needed, right? Because I only had like 5 clients at the time who were maybe paying like $50 a month, right? Like those first beginner days where you're just like,
Balling
yeah.
out of control.
Right, exactly. So you kind of overgive, and then I went to a point where it was just emails, or I'm sorry, not just emails, where it was text messaging, right? So they could text me and all this other stuff, and that got to a point where it was overwhelming and caused me to burn out because like I'm getting texts at 3 in the morning saying I just went through a whole thing of Oreos, blah blah blah. And I'm like, that doesn't feel good either, right? Like I need boundaries as a coach. I need to set up myself up to help these people so that I'm not burnt out because I can't help them if I'm burnt out. And it's not their fault that they're texting me because I didn't set up any boundaries in my coaching, right? So then I switched to all email, right? Which was okay, but it for me, for somebody who really values like communication, all these things, like I just felt like they weren't getting me, like the best version of me as a coach. Cause like I can be very fucking goofy. I can break out into accents. Like my personality is not tied to how
You're
I
pretty out
write.
there. You're pretty
Right.
out
I'm pretty out there. Right. And it's like they're not getting the person they sign up with via email. Right. So then I started doing voice memos to communicate. And then that kind of was like, oh, I kind of sick of sending that. So then I started doing like video looms and stuff like that. And that was like a good balance because they could see my face. I can go over all their stuff, their data, can crack some jokes. They're getting my personality. But it still didn't feel like I was coaching because I was just like, you know what? They're seeing me, but I'm not seeing them, right? So then what I started to do, so this is what I do now is when a client starts up with me, not only do we have like our sales call, but then we have our onboarding call where we go over their whole program and expectations and nutrition guidelines and going over like data I need from them, basically everything that is important for their start of their journey. But it's a Zoom call, right? Because I very much want to get them to a place where they feel secure, where they have certainty, where they have direction, and I want them to see me and hear me, and I want to see them and hear them, so I can start seeing some more body language, so I could hear their tonality, right? And then I have a monthly Zoom call with them as well,
awesome.
right? So I think that was a good balance of hey, like I don't like just sending a Loom video going over your monthly check-in. Like I want to talk to you about what you mentioned in your check-in and what we're going to work towards the next month, right? So for me, that was a good balance of hey, like this is where we started and this is where we're at now. So you can see me, I can see you, but it's not as overbearing as a coach where I feel like I'm burnt out and can't handle that load.
I think too, like the weekly call, you run out of shit to talk about real fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it almost becomes a burden on the client to hop on the call with you. I also am a big fan of like we talked a lot about personal responsibility and ownership at the beginning of
Mhm.
our conversation. And I
Mhm.
think when you are so actively involved with the client, I think it does remove some of that autonomy.
Mhm.
Um, so I have a very honestly almost exactly the same framework as yourself.
Mhm.
I don't mandate the monthly calls; they have access to them if they want.
Mhm.
And in some instances, I'll request calls. Be like, hey,
Mhm.
I think we're due for a call. You're running into some barriers. It's way easier for me to communicate back and forth to you in a 20-minute Zoom call than it would be in back and forth Loom videos.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I also hate voice notes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a client send me, so my clients know I don't like voice notes because I say it to them right at the beginning.
Right.
I had a client send me a 5-minute voice note and I just replied back. I said, I'm not listening to this. Type it. And he was like, "Oh shit, I forgot." And then and then I had the same client did it again. I said, "I'm going to listen to this, but for every that you say, you have to do 10 push-ups." And he's like, "Don't listen to it." And I did, just as a joke. I listened to it and he had to do 600 push-ups.
Oh my God. I love the idea of
60
you just marking it down.
60 and obviously I didn't hold him to the 600 push-ups, but
Right.
that's I think the best mode of communication is one that is easy for both parties.
Mm-hmm.
So if a client is trying to communicate information, then you don't want to miss anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's always best to type it.
Mm-hmm.
I also think typing does have a benefit because it takes longer. So you have
Mm-hmm.
more time to think about what you're typing.
Right.
And it forces the client to actually sit down and reflect as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just emotionally dump.
Right.
I think that is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to, we talked about how intimate the coaching relationship is. And I think it's important to highlight the fact that your business systems need to mimic the type of relationship that you're trying to foster.
Mm-hmm.
So doing the Loom videos, seeing your voice, seeing your face, hearing your voice, that's going to be really important to the client to feel connected with you.
Mm-hmm.
Having the opportunity to have deeper conversations via Zoom calls going to make them feel more connected to you. And
Mm-hmm.
if your goal is to work with somebody long term and address these deep issues,
Mm-hmm.
you need to give them the impetus to stay in it for the long term. If you're not fostering that relationship, if you're not giving them that care, if you're not giving them that attention, they're not going to stay with you for the long term. And the whole entire point of what you're trying to work on isn't going to be achieved. The results aren't going to follow suit.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Have you always worked with the same population of people in terms of, that deep work,
Mm-hmm.
emotional relationship with food, kind of maybe emotional relationship with self, or
Yeah.
has the population that you've worked with changed over time?
It's funny you say that because it's like, like I think when I first started, and I think I think right off the bat, you're going to get the clientele that you speak to all the time, right?
100%.
Especially
Yes.
on socials. So when I first started, I was very like Gymshark, posting aesthetic photos, like very into bodybuilding type of style. So I was
A lot of
getting
pictures with your dick root showing.
oh, if you scroll the 2015 pictures of me on Instagram, it's gonna be a long scroll. I have over 4,000 posts. But if you scroll down, you're gonna see a lot of V lines. You're gonna see some questionable peen pics, maybe like in the undies going
Sexy.
on. So I had a lot of male clients who just wanted to get jacked,
Mhm.
right? Which was cool, right? Because that's where I was at the moment. I was like, yeah, I want to get jacked too. And like, this is the process to do that. And like, that was a very cool thing at the time until, like, we talked about, my own journey changed. Until
Mhm.
my journey changed where I focused less on aesthetics and fitness, nutrition, and melded more of the mental aspect that goes with all this. And that's when my clientele began to change, right? It became like I still coach a lot of guys, but my clientele changed to focus less on aesthetics, even though everybody still wants to lose fat and build muscle. It's like everybody's fucking goal, right? But the clientele change in terms of I started to garner more people who struggle with yo-yo dieting, who struggle with self-sabotage, maybe emotional eating, some sort of stress eating, boredom eating, right? Like, we started to dive into more of those topics because that's what I became more passionate and fascinated about, right? Like, I actually grew bored of the guy who just wanted to get jacked, right? Like,
Mhm.
still a cool goal. I'm still that guy who wants to get jacked, but I have emotions, right? And I now have like a different side of me that allows me to coach differently.
Mhm.
So my coaching transition from like aesthetics, mostly males, to like now I'd say like mostly females who want to end that cycle of yo-yo dieting, who struggled for it for years and years and years on end, right? So yeah, it's funny how it kind of changes and you can kind of reflect back on it as well. And I would say like my clients now get much, much better results, especially because back then I was like fucking doing meal plans and all this stuff where people, were getting results, but they weren't sticking because like
Hmm.
once we're done coaching, they're like, I don't know what to do next, right? It's like I was just giving, we talked about having clients who become very reliant on coaches because coaches are kind of just like you said, if you do too many calls or like it becomes more hand holding rather than like the guidance that we need to
Yep.
give as coaches, right? So that's another thing I noted through my coaching program over the years was like, I was like, man, I was like, why is it that all the clients I've coached are rebounding after they're done coaching with me? Right. So that was a kind of ego check too. It's like, I'm not doing my job if everybody's rebounding their results after I'm done.
100%.
Right.
Yep.
And we understand like that's going to happen with some people, right? Like that's just sort of human nature. But like you also have to look at your processes and your systems to say like, okay, well, like what about my process is not facilitating autonomy when they're done?
Hmm.
Right. And that's the first thing I tell clients now. I go, this is the worst fucking business model because I don't want you forever. Right. I want you to actually be done with me. All right. I want you to graduate. And I go, that's the stupidest fucking thing, but that's just what I want with my coaching program. Right. Because that means you're ready to do this on your own. Right. So that's really how my coaching program has changed over the years, and my clientele has changed over the years based on who I speak to, based on my own journey, and based on my system and processes.
Yeah, it's the same, very similar to myself. Like I started off high performance athletics, so I was working with mostly athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started competing in powerlifting at a high level, so I started coaching only powerlifters. And then as I transitioned more towards uh, a more flexible approach, talking about mindset, talking about
Mm-hmm.
those other aspects that come along with it, now the bulk of my clients aren't competitive, but they
Mm-hmm.
want to perform at a high level and they
Mm-hmm.
want to look the part as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, it's pretty much mimicking my own path.
Right.
And like you, I kind of listen, coaching athletes is fun, but it's really easy. If you wrote down on a piece of paper, I want you to superset eating glass with shitting bricks, they would do it. And they wouldn't ask any questions about it. They would just do it. I have one of the athletes that I coach is a Navy SEAL.
Oh wow.
And the reason I love working with him is because he's a real person on top of being a high performance athlete. So he'll do everything I write down, but we also have like deep, meaningful conversations about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of the athletes that I coach are very similar to me. They want to get the most out of it. They want to learn about the process. And that's what fires me up is the teaching portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
I also
Right.
speak to people who want to learn all day long on my socials, in our newsletters and things like that. So that's the type of clients that I'm going to get. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to mimic you. You directly mimic your business because you are your business.
Right.
And that's great. It does present some barrier to, potentially an exit strategy at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But man, to be honest, I don't know if you feel the same way. I don't really want to exit my business.
Yeah.
I just want to keep
Right.
coaching cool people.
Right. I feel the same, dude. Like I think I respect people who, and I'll say this too, and this might be unfair to say, but I feel like people who go into coaching with the intention of selling their business one day, it's like they probably they probably don't love coaching, right? Like I
I would agree.
imagine it's not their passion. I imagine they're more of like they love entrepreneurship, right? They're looking to be like, what else can I do? Like, can I create a clothing line? Can I coach coaches, right? Like, so I imagine for me, I don't see an exit strategy because I just really love fucking doing this, right? And like, I don't know about you, dude, but I love now flexibility that I have, right? Like I was an in-person trainer for years where I was locked into a gym where I couldn't even leave my county without losing money, right? Like I couldn't go on any sort of vacation without, if there was a snow day, I lost money, right? Like that's just
Yeah.
how it went. So for me, it's like, why would I want to exit this? Like this allows me to help people all over the world. I could do it from anywhere, right? I can go to cool conferences, meet people like you, continue to learn and help others and apply what other people are doing to continue to help others, right? Like I could do this till the day I'm fucking dead, right?
I say that to people all the time because I do coach other coaches and I'm like, listen, I coach other coaches. And to be honest, if I devoted my time to only coaching other coaches, I'd make way more fucking money.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't care to do that because I need to continue to coach my clients
Right.
because I love coaching my clients. So that's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be a part of my business. And if that limits my earning potential, I'm totally okay with that. It's the trade-off
Mm-hmm.
that I'm willing to make.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't have aspirations of, being one of these like run a seven-figure business and blah blah blah. It's like if
Right.
my business makes seven figures, that's great. It's going to make seven figures on helping people.
Right.
It's not going to make seven figures just for the sake of making seven figures.
Mm-hmm.
And I love poking fun at the people like make seven figures. It's like, yeah, you're making seven figures, but you're taking home five
Right. Right.
because you're
Because you're
spending all
expensive.
your money trying to make these
Right.
seven figures.
Right.
Um, and when you run a business from an authentic place, from a place of service,
Mm-hmm.
your overhead's real low.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
You also, I would venture a guess that you spend $0 on marketing
Yeah, I don't.
because all of your people come in as referrals.
Yeah. It's funny. It's referrals. It's obviously through social media being my authentic self, right? I think that's the thing too. You basically what you just mentioned was intention and alignment, right? So when
Yes.
your intention is to be in service to others, your coaching becomes 10 times better. Your sales calls, your numbers for converting sales are going to go through the roof because you're not trying to sell somebody. You're trying to help somebody. And that is the biggest mind shift that I made where it's like, I don't give a fuck if I sell you, right? Like I'll even say that on the phone, but I don't give a fuck you sign up for coaching with me. The goal here is to help you. If you want to sign up for coaching at the end of it, cool. But let's make this clear. Like our intention is to help you in this moment, right? So when you switch to that mindset, you're again, you're just being real, right? Like we talked about that a lot on this podcast. Like you mentioned actually like how people sort of create how you create trust and like there's tons of coaches who are selling like quick fixes and stuff like that. Like honestly, dude, I've always gravitated the person who's just fucking real and authentic. So if that person's just like, you know what, this is really how it fucking goes, I'm just like, you're goddamn right. What are you selling? Because I'm gonna buy it, right? Because it's like you're just being real, you're being authentic, you're presenting it in your own way, right? And that's what is always going to separate good coaches from coaches who are just selling, quick fixes, right? And also, like we mentioned, like intention, but alignment. So, like, same thing. Like, my goal is not to make $1 million. I don't give a fuck about $1 million. I just want to be comfortable. I want to be able to go and visit my family across the country and not have to worry about how I'm going to pay for that, right? If my mom needs like personal training lessons that I could pay for, I'm going to pay for that because I have the money and the means to do that, right? So it's like it's all about your alignment and what you want. I've never given a fuck about expensive cars, right? They're cool to look at, maybe. It
That's
doesn't
my
get me hard looking at one. I drive a nice Honda Civic. Right? It's
Me
just,
too. I really like driving a nice car.
but that's cool because that's you, right? It's not me. I just bought $1,000 guitar. You're probably not going to buy $1,000 guitar, right? Like we all
I'm
have
also
sort
not
of
going to live in San Diego. That's
exactly,
probably the barrier
exactly.
to entry for the expensive car.
Exactly. So it's like our what we align with matters,
Right.
right? Like, so I don't care to make tons and tons of money, right? And that's good because as long as I know what I want, I can now have the actions that are align me with how I get there, right? Whereas a lot of coaches tend to get lost because they see expensive cars from other people, they see expensive houses, and they see all these fancy things. But if that's not what you really want, it's just what you think you should want, your actions aren't going to get supported. Your coaching isn't going to be good because it's not you, it's not authentic. And your intention behind everything is going to get completely washed.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great place to end the serious part of the podcast.
Mm.
I do like to finish with some ridiculous questions.
Excellent.
So you mentioned music. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, what is one album that you could listen to? No
Mm.
skips.
One album I can listen to over and over again is probably Noah Khan's Stick Season. He's like the king of sad boy music, right? So if you want to be in your feels, if you want really good lyrics that make you pause and reflect, that is one. I actually bought that on vinyl too. So that is one album I can listen to over and over again.
You're such a Cali boy.
I'm getting hobbies,
Vinyl,
man. I'm getting
guitars.
cool hobbies. I bought a record player like a few months ago. It's funny because I feel like since moving away from home, it has really separated me from an older version of me and allowed me to figure out or give myself opportunities to try different things and what I want. Right. So like that vinyl record that I bought and the record player, it's cool because it's like it gives me a hobby and also like it actually connected with me with my aunt who's like, you bought a record player? She's like, I used to have all these records and vinyls and stuff like that. And that's something I never would have discovered or like had that conversation with if I didn't just try something new
Right.
and try a new hobby. Right. So it's like, yeah, very Cali thing to do, but also it's like it's a cool lesson for me to just continue to try things and step into your own so that it and you don't know what opportunities are going to come from that. Like for me having that like long conversation about the Beatles albums my aunt used to have and like Leonard Skinner and like all these things, like that was just a cool thing to connect with my aunt that just came from like something I wanted to try.
I love it. What is your favorite post-workout meal?
Ooh, my favorite post-workout meal. Hmm. I'll tell you okay, here's actually my favorite post-workout meal. It's avocado toast with cottage cheese on top with some freshly sliced tomatoes and some sriracha and on sourdough bread and it's fucking orgasmic. That's like my favorite.
There are no words.
That's right. You know why? Because it's really quick to make and it's just so fucking it gives me textures, it gives me some protein, that healthy fat and fiber, and it's just delicious. So that's like my go-to.
Oh goodness.
I did that before I moved to Cali, man.
Do you ride a longboard too?
I walk on 2 feet, man. Oh, are you from Toronto, huh? You
I'm
guys
not,
fucking
I'm not from Toronto.
you're from Canada, eh? Where all the hosers are.
Well, it's funny. You made the joke about hoser earlier. I'm
I did.
looking at my mom's in the front here, just pulled up, ready to give me my
Waiting to hose you down.
yeah, yeah. For people who don't get that joke, because our shower in our house is on the second floor and I can't walk, my showers consist of either my wife or my mother hosing me down in the front of her house.
Mm-hmm. Like a dog.
Legitimately like a dog.
Get this
Yep.
grime off of me.
If there was one person that you would like to see me interview on this podcast, who would it be? With the
Hmm.
caveat that you have to help me get them on the podcast.
Oh wow. See, that is a good caveat. I would say Jordan Syatt if you haven't interviewed him already.
I haven't. Can you get him on?
I can, yeah, I'll text him for you. I think you guys would really align with your strength backgrounds, but also he can get very deep in psychology, and I think you'd really enjoy picking his brain around like motivational interviewing and a lot of stuff we talked about today, sort of getting a client from A to B. So I can absolutely send him a text and be like, "Hey, there's this guy I want to introduce you to
I
named
want to. I want to
Paul."
chirp him. I want to chirp him about being Gary V's trainer and why Gary V's still skinny.
You know, here's a fun fact about when you do interview Jordan. He fucking hates when people only ask him about Gary Vee questions
Yeah,
because
no shit,
that's like the only thing people will bring him on just to get clicks and stuff like that. But it
dude.
is kind of funny. Like he's got some great Gary stories too.
There's very few people that I follow on Instagram specifically for their content. Most of the people that I follow on Instagram are friends or are educators.
Mm-hmm.
I don't follow much for entertainment, but
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate the way that he communicates complex information in a very succinct and easy to digest fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think we should all strive for. I mean, that's the reason why his following is as big as it is.
It is, and he is so incredibly intelligent, and his background alone is like he worked out at West Side for like years and years, like West Side Barbell, right? And
Mhm.
like his knowledge with powerlifting, but how he's transitioned to more like Gen Pop and helping people like with their yo-yo dieting, and like you mentioned, like taking very complex subjects and breaking them down so they're very simple. And it's funny too, though, because I actually saw somebody on the internet tearing him down for that very same reason too. I'm just like, fuck off. I'm just like,
Listen, our entire goal as coaches should be to lower the barrier of entry for people to get fit as
mm-hmm,
low as we can get it. The more people, we have the worst obesity problem ever,
mm-hmm.
yet we have the most coaches. That should speak to how shitty of an industry we are.
1000%. 1000%. I agree.
Oh man, if you had one parting word of wisdom for the audience, what would it be?
Let's see. I would say, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Dr. Seuss. That's one of my favorite all time quotes. I think it kind of ties into a lot of what we talked about today too, where
For
you just
sure.
got to care. You got to care about what you want, and nothing's going to get better until you do. So I think that's one of my favorite quotes that I really align with, and I have literally art around me. I have it written down in front of me. So yeah, unless you care an awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not.
I love it. Dude, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes. Thank
Amazing.
you, everyone, for listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And we'll catch you on the next one.